Welcome to another episode of Chax Chat. Join Chad Chelius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. Today's podcast is sponsored by Venngage. Venngage is a design platform that's not just about creating stunning visuals, but also about inclusivity and accessibility. Venngage doesn't just simplify your design process, but it takes it up a notch with built-in accessibility features. Whether you're looking to run an accessibility check on your designs or export them in the PDF UA format, Venngage has you covered. So head on over to venngage.com and check them out. My name is Chad Chelius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor and one of the accessibility wizards here at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I am the other accessibility wizard. Although, Chad, we have quite a few accessibility wizards here.
We sure do.
It is the what is it? Hogwarts, right? The Hogwarts of accessibility, right? Chax land. And you and I are both certified as accessible document specialists by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And if you want your certification, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org/certifications and get more information about ADS, the web accessibility specialist, your CPAC, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So,
and in all fairness, Dax, I think you and I are on the same page with it's like neither one of us are big fans of titles. Mm. And, when we, kind of took on our new position, they were like, what do you want your title to be? And I think you and I kind of came up with it as a bit of a joke, just kind of like a, offhanded, humor a little bit. But it kind of stuck. And I think it works, we do all things accessibility, document accessibility, and so if it falls under that purview, then it's us, right?
Well, it's interesting, right? So I'll share, for those of you who are listening to this podcast, go watch the YouTube, because I'm going to post on screen right now an image I had an artist actually draw of me as a wizard hovering over a boiling, bubbling pot that says PDF on it, and bubbling up from this pot, this cauldron, is H1 and L and LI and all these different tags. And I'm holding a staff with a globe on it. And the globe has the accessibility icon, that little, man with outstretched arms or person with outstretched arms on it. It was pretty cool. I don't know. Just one day on a whim, I'm like, that would be a cool icon.
Yeah.
I don't use it hardly ever. I don't ever really post it, but it was kind of a fun thing. And I think the reason why we consider ourselves accessibility wizards is because how many times have people said, oh my gosh, I would have never thought of that. Or, oh, how did you do that? And sometimes I reply, it's just magic. I just know. And, wizards back in the day, right? Yeah, wizards back in the day were chemists, and they understood the principles of physics and all of that. And so what seemed like magic was really just knowledge. And that's really kind of where we're at. So quick koi talk today, Chad. Summer is getting close to full effect here. Koi pond is crystal clear. I have this extra filter that I was able to replace the screen for. The screen I had on it was really fine. And what's happening is getting clogged too early. So it was constantly running to clean the screen. I got a little wider screen, and so now it's filtering everything out great, and the koi are doing wonderfully. So
very good.
Yeah,
very good.
Awesome. Cool. Well, today's podcast is one that I think a lot of people maybe overlook. We get so caught up in the checkers and checking for accessibility. What really makes a document accessible? What are the features and functions of a document that mean this document is accessible? Not all the rules and all the expert knowledge.
No.
But what is the core of what makes a document accessible?
Yeah. And you and I have said this several times about, Microsoft Word, and we hear a lot from people who are like, man, this is really hard. And the reality is, like, you only need to know a few key things in Word to really elevate the accessibility of your document, right? Like a few important steps, and they're not hard. They're really just, as you and I have said before, it's using Word correctly
Yeah.
And by doing so, you can really get pretty far, in the process.
Well, and a lot farther now than it used to be,
Mm-hmm.
because it used to be floating text boxes would throw reading order issues all over your document, and you'd have
Yes.
automatically generated alt text by AI, or garbage inserted into the alt text, or figures nested in other things. And Microsoft has really done a great job in improving the way that their new accessibility assistant actually works. So if you haven't checked out the accessibility assistant recently, and you're just still in an older version where you're using the accessibility checker, I would tell you, go upgrade, go, I'm struggling for the word here, go update your copy of
Run your update.
Office.
Yeah, run your Microsoft update and get the latest version of Word. Yeah, I agree, Dax. I mean, I remember back in the day where, like, if you didn't anchor your figures a specific way, then it would fail the built-in checker in Word.
Yep.
It's funny you bring this up, because today I had a client who was building a form in Word,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm going to try to paint this picture for everybody. So the first line of text said if, then it said to. And then the next line of text said insert name here, and then state. So if you can imagine this, it was like it said I underscore to underscore, but then the next line below it showed insert name here and insert date here.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So it creates a really kludgy situation, because it's going to read the first line, then the second line. And when you're trying to do a form, you're going to have to do some manipulation in the tag structure after the fact to make it read correctly.
Well, you're going to have to do that no matter what when you're trying to create forms in Word, right? For everybody listening, Word should not be your starting point when you're creating forms, just because it makes it such a long process. But I totally realize the reality is that a lot of people, that's the program they use, so that's what you have to deal with, right? And good, keep going.
Well, but what I did, and this is probably a topic for a different podcast, right? In Word, you can do a baseline shift on text.
Uh-huh.
And so what I ended up doing is I put all the text on one line, baseline shifted the text that I wanted to be below, and then I literally just drew a line for the visual line that they wanted in the form.
Right.
And what's kind of nice about that, what's weird about Word is Word looks at the line as a figure.
Right. Because
Word wants to make the line a figure, which is bizarre, right? Because, like, when would you ever want to do that? But
now it doesn't. Now, the newest version of Word, when you draw a box, a shape, anything, by default, it is set as decorative. And if it's not in the current build, it's coming. We've been talking with the guys at Microsoft about this. And the question that they proposed was, hey, at what point would you ever want to supply alt text for something like a divider line or a border or something else? And my answer is 99%
almost
of the time, never.
Yeah.
And they said, well, what if we made it artifacted by default, decorative by default? And I said, yes, please.
Super helpful.
If it isn't out there now, it's coming. Just trust me, it's coming out.
Well, I think I have the latest update, and in the version I was using today, it did not automatically artifacted.
Right.
But my point is, it's very simple to mark it as decorative, right?
Sure,
so I just drew the line, said mark as decorative, done. No big deal. Anyway, let's get back to our plan here. I know we kind of segued a little bit.
So what makes a document accessible? It's about using the right tools, right? So proper heading structure, using those headings, whether you're using Word or InDesign or even in Acrobat, making sure that you have a heading level 1, a heading level 2. I just taught at Creative Pro Week the fundamentals of accessible of document accessibility, and one of the core messages in my session was the importance of not only tagging the heading structure correctly, but the visual weight of the heading structure. so that you have your heading level 1 is bigger and bolder or more prominent than your heading level 2 and 3 and so on. So as you move down that hierarchy, the visual weight of those elements decreases in a way that produces a good flow. And
Right.
yeah, it's something I think we all often miss, because we start designing and then we're like, oh, I want this heading to be really small, and then you go back and you're like, oh crap, I've got to tag this as a heading level 2 because it came right after the heading level 1. And it makes you really have to defend what it is you're doing when you design.
Well, my argument on that, though, and I'm speaking mostly about designers, right?
Sure.
As a designer, you do this inherently, right? Like, as a designer, you make your biggest heading, your most important heading the biggest, the boldest,
Right.
grandiose. Then your next level heading is a bit smaller, maybe not as bold, right? You automatically are visually doing this. So you just have to translate that visual impact to a structural impact, right? You want to give users of assistive technology the same experience, right? And as a sighted user, when we look at a document, we see that important heading. Oh, and then we see like a secondary heading that's not quite as important, but still important. And we need to convey that structure to users of assistive technology.
Well, let me pull back the onion here a bit, Chad. So this is the handout that I created for Creative Pro Week. And by the way, if you guys are looking for a creative conference where you can learn a lot in some really short amount of time, it's by the time this podcast airs, the conference will have been over, but look for it for next year. So this was my handout. Now we can see at the top, and I'll describe this for everyone. The title at the top is in, 50-point type, the foundations of accessibility. Underneath it is the byline, by Dax Castro, and it's got my email address. Then off to the right, there's a paragraph, and then a small heading that says accessibility is too hard, ? And then there's a little supporting paragraph underneath it. Now, from a reading order standpoint, I want to go from the title at the top down to my byline, over to the right to this kind of sidebar content, to that heading, which is accessibility is too hard. And the problem is that little heading, I've got it like 12-point type bold. So it doesn't match the visual hierarchy. This document was not designed from a visual standpoint to be accessible, because the cognitive, you have to think about it. Why is this one like 12-point versus some of the other headings on this page are the 4 key factors: headings, image description, style, and color contrast. Those are much larger. They're what you would think would be a normal heading level 2. They're, 80% of the font size of the heading level 1, right? All of it follows this normal, what you would consider a consistent hierarchy, except this little outlier side paragraph with this tiny little heading, right? And this is, go ahead.
Well, but I would argue, like, the way this is designed, my eye is drawn down to the headings, image description, styles, and color.
Right.
I'm not looking at that text to the right, at least not yet.
Right.
Right.
But that's
and maybe
because of the size, because of the size that it is. And had I made the heading level 2 on the sidebar large enough,
bigger,
then bigger, then your eye would go from foundations of accessibility at the top over to the sidebar and to the right, and then down to the stuff at the bottom. So it's about designing purposefully with structure and accessibility in mind. And this is something that takes some practice. I mean, I've been doing this forever and I didn't even think about it. Not to mention, I'm sure some of you who are watching this on YouTube are looking at this handout going, accessibility is too hard. And I knew the moment I put it up, I saw your eyes. For those not listening, for those just listening, Chad picked it out immediately. I could see it. And he was like, oh, there's a typo. I don't want to say anything. I could read it in his face.
But that's one that spell check is not going to catch.
No,
right? You know what I mean?
Accessibility is TO hard.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's my, it's, I don't know if it's dyslexia, but I don't have the greatest typing skills ever, but anyway,
I think everybody understands what you're saying for sure.
Yeah. So the bottom line here is that when you have to create with accessibility in mind, it makes you align your design with purpose. you have to be thinking about the structural organization of the information you have. If I have a sidebar, is that sidebar going to be read before the main content? Where's my heading levels going? Do all of my sidebars have the same heading level too? What does that look like? And sometimes you don't know until you're 3/4 of the way through the document. And you're like, oh man, what I thought worked in the beginning doesn't work now.
Yeah. Well, and I think, Dax, too, like what you're talking about, we're alluding to another important component of making a document accessible. And again, I know we didn't really want to like pick out the WCAG guidelines or anything. We wanted to kind of keep it fairly. However, the sequence in which you read the content is very important, right? And I think your handout that you just had up was a great example of where, when I was tagging that document, I probably would read that paragraph on the right much later in the document. Sure. I think I would go from like that main heading to those secondary headings, and then we'll read that ancillary text later on, you know? And so the sequence is important, right?
Well, and that just goes to show, like for me, I like to read top down, left to right. And so I'm automatically following that eye line as I go down the page. But somebody else, you might look at it and go, you know what? My brain gravitates to the heading size. And that's the thing. And other people might gravitate to the color. Now, in this case, all of my headings are black except for the 4 key points in the document, which are headings, image descriptions, style, and color contrast. And those are this light blue on a really dark blue background. So the idea was I made everything uniform except for the 4 main points I wanted someone to really know. So I really thought about my use of color here to really say, okay, if I just glance at this for 2 seconds, what sticks out to me the most? And it's those 4 key components of accessible design. So that goes back to, we talk about proper heading structure. We talked about logical reading order, making sure we understand that, right? And then making sure that you tag things or create things the way that they are designed. In other words, lists and tables, those things are created using the list features and the table features in the program that you're using as your source, right?
Yep. So that applies to pretty much every program that can output an accessible PDF. That applies to, right? So Word, PowerPoint, Excel, InDesign, right? It applies to all of them, right? So using the tool properly is going to pay big dividends because it's going to output your content correctly.
Yeah. Well, how many times have we seen manual lists where it's a list, but then there's 2 separate paragraphs in the middle of it that split the list into multiple, a list with 1 item and then a list with 3 items when it should just be a single list, all of those things.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. Like whenever people do that, they'll put a paragraph in between 2 bullets. Mm-hmm. And you're like, shouldn't it just be part of that first bullet? Shouldn't it just be included in that bullet? I mean, it would really make your life a lot easier because, I mean, let's be honest. I think Access Word is the only product that I know of that gives me the ability that they have a feature called List Continue, where you can define a paragraph and it'll make it part of the previous bullet. So, yeah. And it's a cool feature because it'll output your list as one big list tag instead of it breaking it up into subsections, like that.
And I agree. It's a great feature. Unfortunately, you have to create a list style for every level of list continue that you have. So if you have a list level 1 with a list continue and a list level 2 with a list continue, you have to create those styles. But I will say you should not be having multiple list levels with multiple paragraphs in between them. You really should be thinking about designing visually more structured than trying to just have death by a million bullets.
Yeah. And like the idea of sub bullets, honestly, I'm not a fan, right? Yeah. But like, if you're going to do a bulleted list, do a bulleted list, but don't do level 1 bullets, level 2 bullets, level 3 bullets, because from a user experience, it sucks, right? I mean, I'm a sighted person, and even when I'm using a screen reader and I get into those nested bullets, even I'm like, where am I? Where am I in this hierarchy? You know, it's really, really difficult. So
Well, I would say that as a good best practice, world according to Dax here, 2 levels deep. If you have to go more than 2 levels deep, something should probably be a heading somewhere to break it up. So
I would agree.
I think we just get in that habit of hitting tab in Word because it just makes it so easy to be like, oh, new thought, tab, right?
Yeah.
And that's an issue. So proper heading structure, logical reading order, create lists and tables correctly, right? And then the next one is applying alt text. And I will tell you that AI has made this phenomenally easier. ChatGPT 4.0 is great, but should never, caveat, should never be trusted as the whatever it spits out is good enough. It should always be reviewed by a human. I posted something on social media months ago from my trip to Japan. No one has, in fact, let me finish my thought. I posted a post on LinkedIn of a sunrise from my hotel room in this high rise building of the sun coming up. And it was this gorgeous photo. And I threw it into ChatGPT and said, hey, ChatGPT, create emotionally connected alt text for this image. And it created this really flowy alt text. But right before I posted, I'm like, oh, this is great. Until I got to the part where it said sunset. And I went, nope, it's not a sunset. It's a sunrise.
Sunrise.
And so what was interesting, though, is that many of the comments on my post were like, this is why humans should always be writing alt text because it was so flowy and emotional and great, right? Lots of really positive feedback. I didn't tell everyone that AI wrote it. I just thought it was interesting that people's comments were very much the supporting of human alt text, which I agree with. I'm not trying to say no, but it's going to get things fundamentally wrong that you need to review, but it can get you really far in giving you a base piece of alt text to work with.
Well, I mean, listen, I mean, we as humans, you know, when given the choice, we'd prefer not to do a lot of work. Right.
Sure.
Like I'd prefer not to have to. So, you know, when you're working on that annual report that has 73 images in it, right?
Yep.
I would prefer if I didn't have to go through 73 individual images and write alt text for each of them. So I think it's a natural desire to want to leverage AI in that situation. And I think it's a good use of AI, right? I think it can be a good use of AI, but you bring up a really great point. It'll prevent you from having to write it. It's not going to prevent you from having to copy edit it because somebody's got to go through and make sure that, okay, yeah, this does make sense. This is logical and that nothing's in there that's, you know, that doesn't make sense. You know?
Well, and this is a good opportunity to, if you've got a series of images that you're using all the time, embed that alt text in the metadata, use Bridge, open it up, and apply the alt text to the alt text field. So that way, if you're using it in InDesign or WordPress, by the way, WordPress will, when you upload an image, if it's got metadata, alt text in the metadata will populate it for you. But most of our listeners are probably InDesign. InDesign, all you have to do is set the object export options to look at the XMP alt text accessibility, right? And that's a really great time saver to be able to have that kind of pre-populated alt text. I know for me, what sucks the most is when I'm doing my manuals, my workbooks for conferences, and I've got to go back through. I've got tons of screenshots of all the different screens and what we're doing and what step it is, etc. I hate having to go back and write alt text for it. But the screen reader doesn't know the context of why I put that image in there. And so I have to write a lot of that all on my own because it's a screenshot of whatever interface, but it doesn't really understand why that interface is there.
And I would encourage people, right? So Dax and I have some scripts for InDesign that can help automate alt text, you know, in your workflow.
Yep.
In the case of Word, we don't have a script for that, but I was working on a project today, Dax, and I looked at the alt text for an image, and the alt text was C colon backslash hard drive backslash, blah, blah, blah. And here's the thing. The checker's not going to flag that.
Right.
The checker's going to be like, oh, good job. You have alt text on this image. Right.
Yeah.
But for the user, they're going to be like, oh, what's this image about? It's going to say C colon backslash, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And so you really, you need to pay attention. It's something we should probably work on, Dax. See if we can write a script for Word like we did in InDesign,
well, we're working on one for PDF for Acrobat. I'm telling you, right now we've got our developers working hard to be able to extract all the alt text out of a PDF and then create a database file for you to go back and edit or review and then inject it back into the PDF. Just like our alt text extractor. If you want more information about the alt text extractor or the automator that works inside InDesign to allow you to replace alt text or to bulk import alt text, reach out to Chatterai on LinkedIn. We offer this plugin as part of one of our classes, the InDesign for Accessibility class. We don't offer it as a separate purchase on our website right now, but that may change in the future. So, yeah. All right. So the last thing, well, not the last thing, but the next main consideration, right? We've talked about heading structure, logical reading order, lists and tables, and being all, making sure that you create objects correctly. Color contrast and the use of color alone is the next, basically the last kind of piece to all of this as a overall broad brush of what makes a document accessible, right, Chad?
Yeah, absolutely. Although it's interesting we're talking about this last because we should have mentioned it first, right? Because whenever I talk about color contrast, I'm like, this is the first thing you should be doing, right? Like, you don't want to think about color contrast after the PDF is made because it's too late. Too late to fix anything, too late, you want to fix it in the source, evaluate your colors, and what we're talking about is the color of your text against its background, right? So whatever color your text is against its background, it has to have a color contrast of 4.5 to 1 for regular text, which is 14 point and smaller.
So 14 point bold and bigger is large text. So 14 point, it's 14 point bold and bigger, or regular text is 17 point regular and below, right?
Oh, so it kind of like overlaps a little bit, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're right. And somebody corrected me recently about that.
Yeah.
Because I've always said 14 point and smaller, but I think you're right, Dax. I think it's 17 point regular and smaller is considered regular text, and 14 point bold and larger is considered large text. So for large text, you technically only need a 3 to 1 color contrast ratio, which is also the requirement for graphic elements that contain meaningful information, right? So it's not all graphic elements, but graphic elements that contain meaningful information that you need to be able to understand you're bound by the minimum color contrast.
It's funny. I had someone come ask me, said, look, I'm running out of accessible colors. This accessibility is I can't make this happen. I've got this map and I've got 15 different colors in here. I can't make them all have a 3 to 1 color contrast against everyone, its neighbor. And I said, you don't have to. It's not about every combination of color contrast. It's about the meaningful pieces. So bar chart, or a call out on a map, or a star, or a station, or some notable object on a graphic, that needs to have at least a 3 to 1 color contrast to either something it's touching or the background that it's on. And and actually both the background itself and if it's touching something else that you need to differentiate. Bar charts are the typical example where you have two bars that are butted right up against each other that are like a series. If you just spread those out just a little bit, give yourself a little bit of white space. Now you don't have to have a 3-to-1 color contrast between the two that aren't touching anymore. It's just between it and its background, right? But then of course you need to use labels or some other means of identifying the information, because those bars can't just be color alone to be able to tell one item from another.
Well, and what's the other cheat, if you will, to kind of get around that, having to have minimum color contrast between those elements?
Well, if you have two objects, this is tricky when you have three, but when you only have two, contrast is a differentiator. So if I have one bar on the left and it is light blue, but 3-to-1 light blue, whatever that is to the background, right? It's a white background, 3-to-1 light blue. My second bar can be navy, really dark blue. And now I don't need to label bar 1 against bar 2. The contrast, the 3-to-1 contrast between those two is considered a differentiator to be able to do it. But when you get 3 items, it's very tricky. A lot of times it doesn't work if you have any kind of color in your background at all. And with 4, it's impossible. There's not enough color variation range. There's not enough lightness, luminance separation between the background, item 1, item 2, item 3, and item 4 for that to work with 4. But with two, it works really great.
Well, and where I was going, Dax, is what you can often do is put a stroke around each object.
Sure.
Because then the color of the bar doesn't have to meet minimum color contrast. It's the stroke that is going to increase your contrast and give you the increased differentiation.
Right. But you just have to be careful. A reasonable person, because somebody has asked me, well, how thick does it have to be? Can I just do a 0.5 outline? Well, it would have to be defensible. Someone with reasonable sight should be able to tell that the stroke is there. So I would say a 1-point stroke, a 0.75 would be the minimum. And even then, you still have to consider that you still need a differentiator between bar 1 and bar 2. That just because you have the stroke only helps you solve color contrast between the background and the bar itself. But I still need a label for bar 1 and a label for bar 2 or something else, because it can't just be that border. So there's a lot to consider. We should do maybe a podcast on that, data visualization, some maybe key points for data visualizations later on. So.
Well, and a good thing to know when we're talking about color contrast, logos are exempt from color contrast requirements, right? Because we can't tell a company's brand, that they need to change their color to meet minimum color contrast. But I will tell you, to save yourself some frustration, stay away from orange and yellow.
Yep.
Right. Just run for the hills, right? Like do not use orange and yellow, because they are so. I've had clients use orange, and I've went into the color contrast analyzer and said, okay, how dark do I need to make it?
It's almost brown.
And it's like mud brown. It's like not even close to orange. So unfortunately, orange and yellow are two really, really hard colors. Unless you get creative somehow. I mean,
well, there's a solution there. There's a solution. So the solution is, it isn't your font color. It's your background color. So that's where you put a field behind your text and make it your brand color orange or your brand color yellow. But your text has to be black or dark blue or navy or something, with that high contrast. And if you can do that, it works out okay. Some brands like Togo's is orange, right there. Togo's sandwich. You guys have Togo's out there where you're at in Philadelphia? So Togo's is a Subway sandwich shop, and their colors are orange and brown, like orange and white, orange and brown. And with their boxes, their to-go boxes are orange ink on a brown box. It is impossible to read. And they basically said, look, this is our brand color and we're sticking to it. And we know that it's not accessible, but we'll give you other formats. If you want to read our menu in black and white, that's fine, but we're not changing our branding colors. And okay, well,
fair enough.
It's about risk, and what risk, how much risk are you willing to take? So awesome. So we've talked about heading structure. We've talked about logical reading order, lists and tables, alternative text, and then color contrast. Those 5 key things really are the foundations of accessibility. You don't need to know what CAG, you don't need to understand all the finer details, but if you can just basically hit those 5 key points, your document is going to be more accessible versus less accessible. And I will tell you the final thing that I would say is that testing your document with a screen reader is really, it is the icing, it is the cherry on top to ensure a good user experience, because now not everybody's accessibility relies on a screen reader, but because there's the visual accessibility, contrast, use of color alone, etc. But the structural aspect, the informational aspect of your accessibility for your document does rely on a screen reader. So when you can use NVDA or JAWS to test your document, you're going to be in a really good place.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And learning how to use a screen reader is not very difficult, but it'll be helpful if you get some instruction, because if you install a screen reader and start pushing buttons and hitting the arrow keys, you're going to kind of fail, right? It's not going to be a very good experience for you, but it's not hard and it's a very useful skill to have.
Yeah, I tell this story almost every time we talk about this. When I first loaded NVDA years and years ago, I couldn't get it to shut up. I literally unplugged my computer. I force powered it off because I couldn't get it to stop. So
yeah,
now I am more wise and understand the power of insert S, which is,
well, now you're a wizard.
Yes, I have. Right? I have learned my wizardry ways. Yes, awesome. Well, Chad, great conversation. Hopefully this has given some people some really good kind of basics of what are the key milestones for what makes a document accessible. And just remember, no single checker is going to give you the blessing that your document is accessible. We use the pack checker, common look, the Acrobat checker, and you're using PDFix, right? So there's lots of ways that you need to test to make sure that you're catching all the little things. Don't take one single checker's word for it. And then, of course, that manual review should always be part of your mantra.
Agreed. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and we want to thank Venngage for being our sponsor. Just as a reminder, Venngage is not just the design platform, but it's about creating stunning visuals. And Venngage doesn't just simplify your design process, but it takes it up a notch with built-in accessibility features. So head on over to venngage.com. My name is Chad Chelius.
And my name is Chax Castro, where every other week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.